What if the most dangerous thing a society can do is let everyone decide? Not dangerous because people are stupid, not dangerous because the masses cannot be trusted with basic rights, but dangerous for a reason far more precise than either of those. A reason that cuts through every political argument you have ever heard and lands somewhere most people are not prepared to go. What if the problem with letting everyone decide is not the everyone, it is the deciding, specifically what most people are deciding with, not their reason, not their considered judgment about what is genuinely good and genuinely true, but their appetite, their anger, their fear, their tribal allegiance, and their wounded pride and their desperate need to belong to something that confirms what they already believe. Plato watched democracy in action for his entire adult life. He watched it in the most sophisticated city in the ancient world, among people who prided themselves on their enlightenment and their freedom and their commitment to open discourse. And what he saw disturbed him so deeply that he spent decades building a philosophical case for why it was, structurally, a system that contained within its own design the seeds of its destruction. He was not a fascist. He was not an elitist in the simple sense. He was a philosopher who had thought more carefully than almost anyone before or since about the relationship between the psychology of individuals and the politics of societies. And what he concluded was this: a society is a soul written large. Whatever is happening inside the individual psyche of the people who compose a society will inevitably express itself in the political structure of that society. The internal order of the soul and the external order of the state are not separate questions. They are the same question at different scales, and a society of disordered souls produces reliably and predictably a disordered state. That was his warning, and it has never been more relevant than right now. To understand what Plato was actually arguing, you have to understand what he was not arguing. He was not arguing that ordinary people are inferior. He was not arguing for aristocracy in the sense of inherited privilege, or for any system that distributes power on the basis of birth or wealth or social class. He was arguing something much more radical and much more uncomfortable. He was arguing that the capacity to govern, to make genuinely good decisions about the direction of a complex society, is a specific skill, like medicine, like navigation, like architecture, and that, like every other skill, it requires training, discipline, and the specific kind of character development that makes wisdom possible. And he was arguing that most people, not because of inherent inferiority, but because of the conditions of ordinary life, have not developed that skill, have not been educated toward it, have not done the internal work that makes it possible to see past immediate appetite and tribal loyalty and emotional reactivity toward what is actually good and actually true. This is not a comfortable argument. It is designed to be uncomfortable, because it asks you to consider something that democratic culture specifically trains you not to consider: that having an opinion and being equipped to make a wise decision are not the same thing, and that a political system which treats them as the same thing is not a system designed for good governance. It is a system designed for something else entirely. Plato developed his political philosophy through the lens of the soul's three parts: the rational, the spirited, and the appetitive. He believed that just as individual souls could be ordered or disordered, with reason either genuinely leading or being displaced by thumos and appetite, societies were organized the same way. Each type of political system corresponded to a type of soul. Each type of soul, when it predominated in a population, produced a corresponding political structure, and he mapped these correspondences with a precision that reads, in the 21st century, less like ancient philosophy and more like an uncomfortably accurate description of what you can observe every time you open a news app. He began with aristocracy, by which he meant not inherited nobility, but the rule of the genuinely wise, the political system in which those who have done the work to develop genuine wisdom and genuine concern for the common good hold power. He considered this the healthiest form of government, not because it was perfect, but because it corresponded to the ordered soul. Reason leading, the other parts in their proper place. He was under no illusions about how rare this was, or how quickly it degraded. From aristocracy, he traced a descent, a sequence of political forms, each one a further fall from the ordered state, each one corresponding to a progressively more disordered type of soul. Timocracy, the rule of the spirited few. When the genuinely wise are replaced by those who are driven by honor and military glory, and the desire for recognition. Thumos in charge instead of reason. Still capable of some order, some discipline, some concern for something beyond immediate appetite, but fundamentally misdirected. Power in service of pride rather than wisdom. Oligarchy, the rule of the wealthy. When even the fire of thumos has been subordinated to appetite, when the dominant motivation of those who hold power is the accumulation of more. When a society begins to organize itself around the protection of wealth rather than the cultivation of virtue, the soul of appetite ascendant running a state, and then democracy. Plato's description of democracy is the part that most people find provocative, because he described it not as a pinnacle but as a stage in a decline. He saw democracy arising from oligarchy through a specific mechanism, when the few who hold wealth push their accumulation too far, when inequality becomes too extreme, when the distance between those who have and those who do not becomes unbridgeable, the many eventually push back. And in that pushing back, a new principle takes hold: freedom, equality, the right of everyone to pursue whatever they desire. And these are not worthless things. Plato did not think freedom was worthless. He thought it was genuinely valuable. But he thought that freedom without wisdom, equality without the capacity to use freedom well, produces a very specific and very predictable kind of chaos. He described the democratic city as a place of extraordinary variety and energy, full of every kind of person pursuing every kind of life, colorful, stimulating, constantly changing, a place where no one is forced to do anything they do not want to do, where every desire is treated as equally valid, where the primary value is the freedom to want what you want and pursue it without judgment. It sounds, on the surface, like the best of all possible worlds. And then Plato asks you to look more carefully. In a society organized entirely around the freedom to pursue desire, who rises to power? Not the wise. The wise do not generally seek power for its own sake. They seek truth. They seek understanding. They seek the good, which is not the same as the popular. They are willing to say things people do not want to hear. They are willing to point toward directions that require sacrifice and discipline rather than promising satisfaction and relief. In a democracy organized around appetite, the people who rise to power are the people who are best at feeding appetite, who understand with great sophistication what people want to hear, what fears to activate, what tribal loyalties to inflame, what promises to make that will generate the most immediate emotional response, what enemy to identify that will give the crowd the satisfaction of unified outrage. These people are not leaders in any meaningful sense. They are flatterers. Plato used that word specifically. The politician in the disordered democracy is a flatterer of the crowd, not a doctor who prescribes what is needed, a confectioner who provides what is desired, and the crowd, whose appetitive soul has been given no worthy direction and whose thumos has been activated by the specific stimulations that serve the flatterer's purposes, mistakes the pleasure of being told what it wants to hear for the satisfaction of being genuinely led. Here is where Plato's analysis becomes almost unbearably contemporary. He described the specific psychological dynamic of the democratic crowd with a precision that maps, feature by feature, onto what you can observe in every political environment in the world right now. The crowd, he said, does not primarily respond to argument. It responds to emotion, specifically to the emotions that thumos generates when it is undirected and threatened: pride, fear, outrage, the specific satisfaction of being part of a group that has identified an enemy and united against it. These emotions feel from the inside like genuine political engagement, like caring about something important, like being on the right side of something that matters. But Plato observed that they are not produced by genuine political wisdom. They are produced by the activation of thumos in people whose thumos has no worthy direction, and they are as easily turned toward destruction as toward anything constructive. More easily, in fact. Because destruction is faster. Outrage is more immediately satisfying than the slow, unglamorous work of building something good. He described a phenomenon he called the drone class, not drones in the modern technological sense, but in the sense of the drone bee. People who consume without producing, who are driven entirely by their appetites and by the specific quality of excitement that comes from having strong opinions without the discipline to examine them. who generate noise and heat in enormous quantities and clarity in none. And he noticed that in the democratic city, the drone class grows, because the democratic city, organized around the equal validity of all desires, has no mechanism for the cultivation of wisdom. It has no investment in the development of reason in its citizens. In fact, it has a specific hostility toward that development. Because reason, when it is genuine, questions, it examines, it asks whether the thing that feels satisfying is actually good, whether the enemy the crowd has identified is actually the source of the problem, whether the leader who is generating so much exciting emotional energy is actually moving toward anything worth reaching. Those questions are not welcome in a city organized around the supremacy of desire. And the people who ask them are not popular. Socrates asked them. Athens killed him for it. And he noticed that in the democratic city, the drone class grows, because the democratic city, organized around the equal validity of all desires, has no mechanism for the cultivation of wisdom. It has no investment in the development of reason in its citizens. In fact, it has a specific hostility toward that development. Because reason, when it is genuine, questions, it examines, it asks whether the thing that feels satisfying is actually good, whether the enemy the crowd has identified is actually the source of the problem, whether the leader who is generating so much exciting emotional energy is actually moving toward anything worth reaching. Those questions are not welcome in a city organized around the supremacy of desire. And the people who ask them are not popular. Socrates asked them. Athens killed him for it. And then comes the step in Plato's argument that is the most important and the most underappreciated. Democracy does not end in freedom. It ends in tyranny. This is the move that surprises people most, and it is the move that is most worth understanding clearly. Plato argued that the progression from democracy to tyranny is not accidental. It is structural. It follows directly from the logic of a system organized around the freedom to pursue desire, without wisdom to direct it. Here is the mechanism. In the democratic city, freedom is the supreme value. Every desire is equally valid. Every voice has equal weight. The culture of unlimited freedom gradually erodes every structure that places any limit on appetite. The family structure that asks the young to develop discipline. The educational system that asks students to engage with difficulty. The cultural traditions that carry accumulated wisdom, even when that wisdom is uncomfortable. The civic institutions that ask citizens to subordinate immediate desire to long-term common good. All of these feel, in the democratic culture organized around freedom, like oppression, like the unreasonable demands of the past on the liberated present, and one by one they are abandoned or discredited or simply ignored. And as they are abandoned, the space they occupied is filled by something. Not wisdom. Desire. The appetite of the crowd, with nothing to direct it and nothing to limit it, becomes increasingly extreme, increasingly impatient with any delay of satisfaction, increasingly hostile to anyone who suggests that not all desires should be immediately met, increasingly susceptible to anyone who promises to remove all obstacles to the crowd's wanting. And that promise, the promise to remove all obstacles, to give the crowd what it wants, without asking it to develop the capacity to want wisely, is the specific promise of the tyrant. The tyrant does not arrive as an obviously monstrous figure. Plato was clear about this. The tyrant arrives as the ultimate champion of the people's freedom, the defender of the crowd against whatever elite or institution or tradition is being blamed for the crowd's frustration. The one who finally is not going to ask anything of anyone, but is instead going to give everyone what they have been promised and denied. The crowd, whose appetite has been running without direction for long enough that it has become genuinely tyrannical within the individual soul, recognizes something in this figure, responds to it viscerally, elevates it enthusiastically, and discovers, too late, that the external tyrant is simply the internal tyrant of the disordered soul, written at the scale of the state. The soul that is ruled by appetite, that has no reason leading it. that has its thumos directed entirely toward whatever enemy the appetite has identified as the source of its frustration, that cannot govern itself and therefore cannot govern anything. That soul, at the scale of a city, is tyranny. Now, here is the question Plato is really asking. Not what is wrong with democracy in the abstract, not which political system is theoretically best, but something far more personal than either of those. What kind of soul are you bringing to your political life? Because the society is a soul written large, and the soul it is written from is yours and mine, and the soul of every person engaging with political life, from whatever level of inner order or disorder they happen to currently inhabit. When you engage with political content, which part of your soul is doing the engaging? If it is primarily appetite and the undirected thumos, then your political engagement, regardless of which side it is on, regardless of how righteous it feels from the inside, is contributing to exactly the dynamic Plato described, adding heat to a system that already has too much heat and not enough light. Feeding the drone class regardless of your nominal affiliations. If it is reason genuinely operating, then your engagement looks different. It asks harder questions. It is less certain. It is less satisfying, emotionally, in the short term. It does not provide the hit of tribal righteousness that appetite and thumos generate. But it moves towards something real, rather than just circling the same emotional territory with increasing intensity. Plato is not asking you to disengage from political life. He is asking you to examine the quality of soul you are bringing to it. And he is suggesting, with the patience of someone who watched his mentor die at the hands of the democratic crowd and spent the rest of his life thinking about why, that the most important political act available to any individual is the act of ordering their own soul. Not because personal virtue is a substitute for political engagement, but because political engagement from a disordered soul is not engagement at all. It is participation in the noise. There is a passage in the Republic where Plato describes what he calls the philosopher's return to the cave. The philosopher who has ascended toward truth, who has developed genuine wisdom through years of disciplined examination, descends back into the cave of ordinary political life, not because the cave is comfortable, because the cave is where the people are, because wisdom that remains in isolation from the world it could help is not wisdom fulfilling its purpose. And the philosopher in the cave cannot simply tell people what is true, cannot simply present the conclusions of genuine reason and expect the crowd to follow them, because the crowd is not, in that moment, primarily operating from reason. It is operating from appetite and the undirected thumos. And these parts of the soul do not respond to argument the way reason does. They respond to story, to image, to the feeling of being genuinely seen and genuinely led rather than managed and manipulated. This is not a concession to irrationality. It is a recognition of how change actually works in human beings and therefore in human societies. You do not change a disordered soul by presenting it with correct arguments. You change it by engaging with where it actually is, by meeting the appetite and the thumos honestly and asking them, through the specific art of genuine communication, to follow a direction that reason has genuinely identified as good. This is what Plato meant by the philosopher king, not a dictator, not an autocrat, a person who has done the work of ordering their own soul, and therefore has the genuine capacity to help order the souls of others, not through force, but through wisdom, not through manipulation, but through truth presented in the form that truth needs to take to be genuinely received. The philosopher king is not a political fantasy about the perfect ruler. It is a description of what every individual can become in relation to their own inner republic. The kingdom you are actually being asked to govern is the one inside you, the rational part that should be leading, the spirited part that needs worthy direction, the appetitive part that needs genuine acknowledgement and genuine redirection. When you govern that kingdom well, you bring a different quality of soul to every other domain of your life, including your political life. And a society of people doing that work is a different society than the one Plato was warning about. Here is what Plato's warning actually asks of you. Not to abandon democracy, not to stop caring about politics, not to disengage from the legitimate and important questions of how power is organized and exercised in a society, but to be ruthlessly honest about the quality of your own engagement with those questions. Are you thinking or are you feeling? not as a dismissal of feeling. Feeling has a place in political life. The anger that responds to genuine injustice is thumos functioning as it should. The compassion that recognizes suffering in others is a real and important form of political intelligence. But the outrage that is manufactured by systems designed to harvest your emotional activation for engagement metrics, the tribal certainty that your side is entirely right and the other side is entirely wrong and no genuine examination is required, the addictive quality of political content that provides a constant supply of enemies and the satisfaction of unified contempt. The way that following political media can feel from the inside like caring deeply about important things, while producing in you precisely the disordered soul that Plato described as the precondition for tyranny. These deserve examination, not because your concerns are invalid, but because the soul that has been activated into chronic outrage is not the soul that can see clearly. And a society of souls that cannot see clearly is not a democracy in any meaningful sense. It is a market for flatterers. Plato ends his discussion of political decline, not with despair, but with a question. The question of what the individual can do. And his answer is the same answer he gives to every political question. It begins inside, with the work of understanding your own soul, with the daily practice of asking which part of you is currently running things and whether it should be, with the cultivation of reason not as a cold and bloodless faculty, but as the part of you that can see past immediate appetite and tribal loyalty toward what is actually good and actually true. This work does not produce certainty. The ordered soul is not an arrogant soul. Genuine wisdom, Plato believed, begins with the recognition of how much you do not know, with the Socratic humility of a mind that has examined enough of its own assumptions to understand how many of them did not survive examination. That humility is not weakness. It is the specific strength of a soul that has stopped confusing the loudness of its own certainty with the accuracy of its own judgment. In a world organized to make your thumos as loud as possible and your reason as quiet as possible, cultivating that humility is a genuinely radical act, more radical in its way than any political position, because it changes not what you believe, but how you believe it, not what side you are on, but the quality of soul you bring to being on it. And a society in which enough people are doing that work is a society that has begun to build, from the inside out, the thing Plato was always actually describing. Not a perfect political system, a genuine community of souls capable of governing themselves, which is the only foundation on which anything worth building can stand. The warning Plato issued across 2,500 years of distance is not primarily about politics. It is about you. About the specific quality of soul you are developing in the course of your ordinary daily life and what that soul produces when it engages with the world beyond itself. About whether the part of you that is making judgments about what is true and what is right and what should be done is the part of you that has done the work to make those judgments well. About whether you are being led or whether you are following. About the difference between the opinion that feels like conviction and the wisdom that has been earned through the genuine, painful, never completed work of examining your own assumptions until the ones that survive are the ones that deserve to. He is not asking you to agree with him. He is asking you to ask better questions, to hold your certainties more lightly, to be more suspicious of the satisfactions that political life provides when they feel too good, too clean, too confirming of what you already believed, to remember that the soul that has not ordered itself cannot order anything else, and to begin, quietly, unglamorously, in the privacy of your own mind, the work that he believed was the only genuine foundation for a society worth living in. The work of becoming someone whose soul is genuinely in order, not because that work makes you perfect, because it makes you, in the only way that actually matters, genuinely fit to decide.